I never thought I'd become the kind of person who hides in shadows, watching my own husband like he's a stranger. But here I am, crouched behind a dumpster across the street from an apartment building I didn't even know existed until 2 weeks ago, and my whole world is about to shatter in ways I never could have imagined. My name is Rebecca, and 6 months ago I had what I thought was a perfect marriage. David and I met in college, got married at 25, and spent the last decade building a life together in Seattle. He's a software engineer. I'm a graphic designer. We have a small house with a garden I'm proud of, and up until a month ago, I would have told you we were happy. I would have been so sure of it, but then I found the credit card statement. Not our joint account, but one I didn't know existed. I wasn't snooping, at least not intentionally. I was looking for our insurance papers in David's desk drawer when I saw the envelope already opened, tucked under some folders. The address on it was our house, but the card number was unfamiliar. My hands trembled as I pulled out the statement, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Monthly charges to the same place. Parker Apartments, $1,500 every single month for the past 8 months. 8 months. While I was planning our anniversary dinner, while we were talking about maybe starting a family, while I was living my normal life, David was paying for an apartment across town. The worst part wasn't even the money, it was the other charges. Grocery stores near that address, a pharmacy, purchases from Target and Bed Bath & Beyond. Someone was living there, and David was taking care of them. I sat at his desk for an hour, that statement in my shaking hands, trying to find an explanation that didn't break my heart. Maybe it was for a relative who needed help. Maybe it was an investment property he wanted to surprise me with. Maybe there was some logical reason my husband of 10 years was keeping a secret apartment, and I was imagining the worst. But deep down, I knew. You always know, don't you? You just don't want to believe it. That night, I almost confronted him. He came home at his usual time, kissed me on the cheek like always, asked about my day like nothing was wrong. We ate the pasta I'd made, watched an episode of the show we'd been binge watching, and went to bed. He fell asleep within minutes, his breathing steady and peaceful, while I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with images of him with someone else, another woman sleeping in his arms in that secret apartment. Another life he was living without me. I couldn't do it. I couldn't ask him directly because once I asked, once those words left my mouth, there was no taking them back. Our marriage would be divided into before and after that conversation. So instead, I made a decision that both terrifies and empowers me. I decided to find out the truth myself. The next day, after David left for work, I drove to the address on that credit card statement. Parker Apartments was a mid-rise building in a neighborhood I rarely visited, about 20 minutes from our house. It looked nice, actually modern, the kind of place young professionals live. I sat in my car for 2 hours that first day, watching the entrance, feeling like a character in a movie, except this was my real life falling apart. I didn't see David that day, or the next. But I learned the building's rhythm. People leaving for work in the morning, coming home in the evening, dog walkers and food delivery drivers. I felt insane, sitting there day after day, but I couldn't stop. On the 4th day, I finally saw his car pull into the parking garage. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. He told me that morning he had back-to-back meetings all day. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I watched him get out of his car, carrying a bag from Whole Foods, and walk into the building like he belonged. There, like this was completely normal. I waited 15 minutes, then followed him inside, slipping through the door behind a woman with a stroller who barely glanced at me. The lobby was clean and modern, with mailboxes along one wall. I scanned the names quickly, looking for David's, but didn't find it. The elevator dinged and I panicked, ducking into the stairwell. I had no plan, no idea what I was doing. All I knew was that my husband was somewhere in this building, living some secret life, and I needed to know why. I didn't find him that day. The building was too big, and I was too scared of being caught. But I came back the next day, and the next. I started timing my visits to match when I'd seen him arrive. I bought a baseball cap and sunglasses, changed my usual style, felt ridiculous and heartbroken all at once. On the 7th day of my surveillance, I followed a pizza delivery guy into the building and heard him knock on apartment 514. When the door opened, I heard David's voice. "Thank you, man, appreciate it, casual, comfortable, like he lived there." Apartment 514, now I had a target. I stood in that hallway after the delivery guy left, staring at that door, wondering what was behind it. Who was behind it? Was she beautiful? Was she younger than me? Did David laugh with her the way he used to laugh with me before life got routine? Did he tell her he loved her? I couldn't knock. I couldn't face it yet. So I did something that scared me even more. I decided to watch and wait. I found a spot across the street, in the parking lot of a coffee shop, where I had a clear view of the building's entrance. I started documenting everything: what time David arrived, how long he stayed, whether he was alone or with someone. I bought a cheap camera with a zoom lens, felt like a private investigator in a bad thriller, but I couldn't stop. 3 weeks into my surveillance, I still hadn't seen anyone else. David came and went alone, usually staying for 2 or 3 hours before heading home to me. He'd walk in our door, kiss me hello, tell me about his day at the office, and I'd smile and nod and pretend I didn't know he was lying. Pretend I hadn't just watched him leave another home. The worst part was how good he was at it, how naturally the lies came. It made me wonder what else he'd lied about over the years. Then one Tuesday evening, everything changed. I was in my usual spot, camera ready, when I saw David's car pull up at 6:30. But this time, he wasn't alone. My heart stopped as I watched him get out, walk around to the passenger side, and open the door. Someone got out, but it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a mistress or a girlfriend. It was a boy. A kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a backpack and holding David's hand. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the camera. A child. David had a child I didn't know about. The implications crashed over me like waves. Had he cheated on me years ago? Was this his son from before we met? Why would he hide this? We talked about kids. We tried for a baby last year and it hadn't happened, and we decided to wait, to just enjoy being us for a while longer. And all that time, he had a son. I watched them walk into the building together, David's hand protective on the boy's shoulder, and something inside me broke. This wasn't just an affair. This was an entire secret life, an entire secret family. I sat in my car and cried for the first time since finding that credit card statement, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal, but tears wouldn't give me answers. I wiped my face, steadied my breathing, and made a decision. I was going inside that apartment. I was going to see with my own eyes what David had been hiding from me. I waited until the sun set, until the streetlights came on, and then I walked across the street with purpose. Getting into the building was easy now that I'd done it before. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, my reflection in the metal doors showing a woman I barely recognized. Pale thin, with dark circles under her eyes from weeks of poor sleep. I walked down the hallway to apartment 514 and pressed my ear against the door. I could hear voices inside, David's deep tone and a child's higher pitch, talking about homework. Something about fractions. It sounded so domestic, so normal, so much like the life I thought I had with him. My hand reached for the doorbell, then stopped. What would I say? What would I do? Scream, cry, demand answers in front of this child who was innocent in whatever mess David had created. Instead, I took out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding. I called David's mother. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Rebecca, honey, how are you?" I asked her a question I should have asked weeks ago. "Patricia, does David have a child I don't know about?" The silence on the other end lasted an eternity. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Oh, sweetheart, I thought he told you. You need to talk to David, right now." I hung up and knocked on that door, my whole body trembling. Footsteps approached and then it opened, and there was David, his face going white when he saw me. "Rebecca," he said, and the guilt in his eyes confirmed everything. I pushed past him into the apartment before he could stop me. The place was neat, simply furnished, but what caught my attention were the medical supplies and 4-pole in the corner. Medication bottles lined up on the kitchen counter. And sitting on the couch, looking at me with wide eyes, was that little boy, thin and pale in a way that had nothing to do with lighting. He had David's eyes. "Who is this?" the boy asked David, his voice small and uncertain. David's face crumpled and he said, "This is Rebecca, my wife." Then he looked at me, tears streaming down his face, and said the words that would haunt me forever. "This is Connor. He's my son. He has leukemia. And he's been in treatment for 8 months. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to tell you that I had a son from before we met, that his mother died 2 years ago, that he showed up on our doorstep sick and alone with nowhere else to go. I didn't know how to tell you I chose to help him without asking you first." The room spun. Everything I'd imagined, every terrible scenario my mind had created over the past month, was wrong. This wasn't an affair. This wasn't betrayal in the way I thought. This was something far more complicated. I looked at Connor, this sick child who was David's son, and then at my husband, who'd been living a double life not out of malice but out of fear and love and impossible choices. David collapsed into a chair and started talking, the words pouring out like he'd been holding them back for months. He told me about Emma, a girlfriend from college he dated briefly before we met, how she'd gotten pregnant, and never told him, moved away, raised Connor alone. How 2 years ago she died in a car accident and Connor went into foster care. How 8 months ago, Connor's caseworker had tracked David down because Connor had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia and needed someone to make medical decisions and be there for treatments. "I should have come to you immediately," David said, his voice breaking. "I should have told you everything, but I was scared. Scared you'd leave. Scared you'd be angry that I had a child I never knew about. Scared you'd resent Connor for existing." And then the treatment started and they were so intense. And he was so sick. And I just kept thinking I'd tell you after the next round, after things stabilized, after I figured out how to make you understand that I didn't choose this but I couldn't walk away from him either. I stood there in that apartment, looking at this child who was fighting for his life, and I felt everything at once. Anger at David for lying, heartbreak for Connor who'd lost his mother and was battling cancer. Confusion about what this meant for us, relief that it wasn't an affair. Guilt for all the terrible things I'd imagined, fear about what came next. Connor was watching me with those big eyes, David's eyes, and he asked quietly, "Are you mad at us?" And in that moment, I understood the impossible position David had been in. How do you tell your wife you have a terminally ill child you never knew existed? How do you ask her to suddenly become a stepmother to a sick boy who needs constant care? How do you risk your marriage while trying to save your son's life? I knelt down in front of Connor and said, "I'm not mad at you, sweetheart. Not at all." Then I looked at David and said, "But we need to talk. Really talk. No more secrets, no more lies. If we're going to get through this, if we're going to help Connor together, I need the complete truth about everything." That night, David told me everything. Every doctor's appointment, every treatment, every terrifying moment when they didn't know if Connor would make it. He showed me medical records, school reports, photos of Emma that Connor kept by his bed. He explained how he'd been using the secret credit card to pay for everything because he didn't know how to explain the charges on our joint account. How he'd been working remotely some days from the apartment when Connor was too sick for school. How he'd been living in two worlds, trying to be a good husband to me and a good father to a son I didn't know existed. The hardest part was seeing how much it had destroyed David, the guilt, the fear, the constant lying. He'd lost weight, couldn't sleep, was having panic attacks at work. And through it all, he'd been trying to save Connor's life while protecting our marriage, and in the process, he'd nearly destroyed both. We talked until 3 in the morning while Connor slept in the bedroom. I asked David if he loved Connor, and he said, yes, with a fierceness that surprised me. He's my son. I didn't know he existed for his whole life, but now that I do, I can't imagine letting him face this alone. I asked if he still loved me, and he took my hands and said, more than anything. I'm so sorry, Rebecca. I'm so sorry I didn't trust you enough to tell you the truth. I wish I could say I forgave him immediately, that love conquered all, that we became a happy family overnight. But real life isn't that simple. I was hurt. I was angry. I felt betrayed even though I understood why he'd done it. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal quickly, even with the best intentions. But I also couldn't walk away from a dying child. That's what it came down to. Whatever mistakes David had made, whatever lies he told, Connor was innocent. He was 8 years old with cancer, and he needed people who loved him. So I made a choice. I chose to stay, to try. To see if we could build something new from the wreckage of what we'd had. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I moved some of my things into the apartment so I could help with Connor's care. We told our families, endured their shock and judgment, and eventual support. I learned about chemotherapy schedules and blood counts and how to help a child through treatment that makes them sicker before it makes them better. I watched David transform into a father, patient and loving even on the hardest days. And slowly, impossibly, Connor and I formed our own bond. He taught me his favorite video games. I read him books before bed. We watched movies together during his bad days when he was too tired to do anything else. He started calling me Becca instead of Rebecca, and then one day, after a particularly rough treatment, he reached for my hand instead of David's. I'm not going to tell you it was easy or that everything worked out perfectly. David and I went to counseling, had fights about trust and honesty, worked through layers of hurt and resentment. There were days I wanted to leave, days I questioned everything. But there were also moments of grace, watching David read to Connor, seeing Connor laugh despite everything he was going through, realizing that family isn't always what you planned. Sometimes it's what life gives you and you have to decide if you're brave enough to accept it. Connor's in remission now. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. We've moved into a bigger house together, all 3 of us, and we're figuring out how to be a family. It's messy and complicated and nothing like what I imagined my life would be. But when I look at Connor, healthy and happy and calling me mom, I know I made the right choice. The secret apartment is empty now, a reminder of the darkest period of our lives. Sometimes I drive by it and remember the terror I felt, thinking my husband was having an affair, not knowing he was trying to save his son. And I think about how wrong we can be about people, even the ones we love most, how secrets can grow from fear instead of malice, how the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than the lies we tell ourselves in the dark. I discovered David's secret apartment and spied on every move, and what I found inside did scare me, but not in the way I expected. It scared me because it showed me how fragile trust is, how quickly everything can fall apart, how much courage it takes to choose love when you have every reason to walk away. But it also showed me that sometimes the most terrifying